Consistency is one of the most important things that I think people have a hard time understanding. And let's be honest with ourselves for a second. Most people don't fall off consistency because they suddenly stop caring. They fall off when showing up starts to feel heavier than it used to. And it's not because the goal changed, but because they changed emotionally. And that's honestly what I didn't understand for a long time. I thought consistency was about discipline, about toughness, about pushing through no matter what. But when I actually looked at the moments where I stopped showing up, it wasn't random. It followed patterns, right? Certain seasons and emotional states and conversations that I had with myself internally. And that's what this episode is about, consistency. So before we talk about how to become consistent, we have to talk about where consistency actually breaks, because once you understand that, the whole thing really stops feeling so mysterious and confusing. So for me, consistency usually doesn't break when things are going well. It breaks when I feel off. And that's something I didn't really understand at first. I used to think that inconsistency came from laziness or a lack of discipline or not wanting something, badly enough. But when I look back, honestly, the times I fell off the hardest weren't random. They followed those patterns that I had mentioned. Winter is a big one for me. There's less sunlight, less energy. I live in a place that's very cold and it snows. It gives you more time alone with your thoughts, and it's not that I suddenly stop caring. It's just that everything feels heavier, right? Doing the same things takes more effort than it did a few months ago. Getting started with new things, or anything for that matter, just feels harder, and your body wants comfort more than progress. And emotionally, that's usually when consistency starts slipping. Not because I don't know what to do, but because I don't feel like myself. And there's a subtle shift that kind of happens before you fall off, and it's more like a conversation in your head, and you've probably experienced it before. You kind of wake up and think, I don't really feel like doing this today. And then your brain starts negotiating, not like outright quitting what you're about to do or that you know you need to do, but just negotiating with yourself, saying things like, I'll skip today and make it up tomorrow, or missing one day, it won't hurt me, or I've been good lately, or I deserve a break. And the thing is, none of those thoughts are, obviously wrong. They sound reasonable, and that's why they work. But what I've noticed is that once that internal fight starts, once you're actively debating whether to show up, that consistency is already under pressure. Okay, it's emotional first. It's not logistical. And people like to say they fell off because, they got busy, but most of the time, busyness just exposes what was already happening internally. Because when you feel aligned with something, you'll make time. And when you feel disconnected, everything feels like effort. And then there's the moment that really messes people up. Okay, breaking the streak, missing a day, right? Because the second that happens, the voice changes in your head. It's no longer, I don't feel like doing this today. It becomes, well, I already messed up. And that's when people start beating themselves up. You feel like you have to restart. Like all the progress you made up until this point somehow doesn't count anymore. And mentally, that's a heavy game. It turns into an all or nothing game. Either I'm perfect or I've failed. And once you frame it that way, it becomes harder to get back on track. It's not easier. And what's interesting is that consistency actually comes easy and easier in certain environments. When you're doing the things that you're already good at, when the environment that you're in supports the habit, when the feedback feels immediate. And that's why people can be extremely consistent in areas that they feel confident in and they feel comfortable in. And they can be inconsistent everywhere else. It's not about discipline, it's about friction. I used to think consistency meant doing the same thing every day at the same intensity no matter what. High output, no excuses, no variation. But that definition is unrealistic, and honestly, from personal experience, it's unsustainable. What I now understand is that consistency isn't about perfection. It's about returning. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean showing up even when the energy is low, adjusting the effort without abandoning the direction that you're in, and staying in the lane even when the pace at which you are going changes. Consistency isn't about doing everything right. Everybody likes to feel like consistency is consistent output. They like to measure it on output. It's not doing everything right. Consistency is not disappearing when things feel wrong. And there's a lie that most people believe about consistency. They believe that it is a character trait. Like some people have it and some people don't. Right? You're either disciplined or you're not. You're either locked in or you're just lazy. And that idea really messes a lot of people up because if you believe consistency is about willpower, then every time that you fall off, you don't analyze the system, you'll attack yourself. You'll ask, what's wrong with me instead of why did this break? And I used to think consistency meant forcing myself to do the same thing at every level, every day, no matter how I felt and no matter what was going on, no matter the season that I was in, just kind of push and grind and show up harder. You got to get through it. And don't get me wrong, that works for a little bit, but eventually it cracks because willpower is not infinite. Willpower is emotional energy. And as you know, or should know, or maybe have come to find, or maybe will come to find, emotional energy fluctuates. And what I've realized over time is that consistency doesn't break because people stop wanting the outcome or the goal that they're aimed towards. It breaks because the cost starts feeling higher than the meaning. When the effort required feels disconnected from why you're doing it, your brain will start resisting. And that resistance can show up in many forms, like procrastination. That's probably the most common one. Boredom, saying things like, I'll do it tomorrow, or just indulging in distractions or excuses that sound logical. And it's not because you don't care, but because your nervous system is trying to protect you from wasted effort. Here's something that really changed how I look at consistency. If consistency was purely about discipline, then people would be consistent in everything. Okay, but they're not. People are wildly consistent in some areas and completely inconsistent in others. Same person, same day, different behavior. So, what is the difference? Meaning and feedback. That's the difference. People will stay consistent where they understand why it matters, where they can see progress, even small progress, and where their identity feels connected to the action. Okay, but they fall off where the goal feels abstract or the payoff feels super far in the future or distant, and the effort that they're putting in feels repetitive and doesn't feel like it has purpose. And that's not weakness, that's just how humans work. Another lie about consistency is that it has to look the same every day. Same routine, same output, same intensity, same level of action. But real consistency is directional. It's not identical. Okay, you don't stop being consistent because one day you showed up at 60% instead of 100%. The real time that you stop being consistent is when you break the relationship with the goal. When missing once turns into quitting mentally. That's the real failure point. And most people don't fail because they miss days. They fail because they interpret the missing of that day as a reason or evidence that they're not the kind of person who follows through. And once that belief sets in, that's when consistency collapses. And that's why, never miss a day, that quote, or just like kind of the concept of don't miss a day is actually terrible advice for most people because consistency then becomes fragile. And one disruption, the whole thing will shatter. What actually works is understanding that consistency is about continuity, right? Not how hard you go, but how often you return. I mean, I guarantee you've probably heard quotes about just doing small, consistent actions or just doing something small every day. And that's true. It's not about how hard you go, it's about how often you return. The strongest people that I know or that I've met or seen aren't the ones who never fall off because that's just innate. They're the ones who don't make falling off mean anything about who they are, right? If they miss a day, they come back, right? They miss a week and they still come back and they might lose momentum, but they rebuild it without any self-attack or drama or identity crisis, and that is real consistency. And once I stopped treating consistency like a performance that I was trying to put on for either myself or others and started treating it like a relationship, something that I maintain and commit to and repair and recommit to if I fail, it stopped feeling so fragile. that's when it becomes sustainable. And that's when it became sustainable for me. And I had to eventually admit to myself that consistency comes from stabilizing who you are while you're doing the thing, whatever it is that you're doing. Because the truth is, most people don't quit habits. Okay, it might look like that externally. You stop going to the gym, you stop eating healthy, you stop reflecting every day, you stop whatever it is. It looks like that on the outside, but they don't quit those habits. They quit the versions of themselves that they can't maintain. Because if it wasn't a version of themselves, then they wouldn't be trying to do those actions in the first place. There's the version of them out there that exists that does those actions. But they can't maintain that. They try to act like someone that they're not yet. They adopt those routines that belong to a future version of them and then wonder why it feels forced. So every day becomes like you're putting on a show, like you're acting. I need to feel motivated. I need to be disciplined. I need to be locked in. And the second that they don't feel that way, consistency breaks. Okay, the shift that changed everything for me is looking at it as an identity and emotional regulation problem. If your emotions run the show, your behavior will fluctuate. If your identity or self-outlook is unstable, your habits will be too. Think about it. When you're emotionally steady, showing up feels easier, even when it's boring, right? When you feel good emotionally, you can show up anywhere. But when you're emotionally dysregulated, everything feels heavy, even the simple things. So the question then becomes, how do you build consistency that survives bad days? I'll tell you how. You stop relying on emotion and motivation, and you anchor your behavior to direction and identity. Not what do I feel like doing today, but what kind of person am I becoming? And it sounds super abstract, I know, but it's actually very practical. If you see yourself as, I'm someone who shows up even when I don't feel perfect, then showing up at 60% still counts. It still counts as showing up. But if you see yourself as, I'm someone who's only consistent when everything feels aligned or everything is going right for me, then inconsistency is inevitable. And you want to know another piece that people miss is feedback. Consistency dies when effort feels invisible. Or rather, it is super hard to maintain when effort feels invisible. If you don't see progress, your brain stops believing that the behavior matters, even if it logically knows that it does. And that's why consistency improves when you track the right metrics, notice small wins, and reflect instead of just grind. And honestly, one of the biggest mental shifts that I had for myself that can help with this is instead of focusing on the outputs or the wins or, the progress, just track the inputs. Your win should be inputs. Did I do the thing today? Cool. Did I complete this? Did I track this? Did I do what I said I was going to do? Focus on inputs, not outputs. Because when you focus on inputs, that shifts your mind around the way that you look at consistency. And when you reflect on that instead of just grinding, consistency improves. Action without reflection turns into exhaustion. Okay, reflection without action turns into overthinking. But when they come together, that's where direction starts forming. And once it does, consistency stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like momentum. The goal that I want you to understand isn't to feel motivated every day. As you know, if you don't already know, I said this in, I think it was my second episode about motivation and discipline, that motivation is emotional. Okay? It's temporary. So the goal isn't to feel motivated every day, but the goal is to build a system where low energy days don't knock you off course. Or when you miss a day or miss something, it doesn't mean quitting. And when you show up, it feels aligned, not forced. That's when that consistency compounds. Not because you're tougher, but because you're clearer. So if consistency isn't about willpower and it's not about being perfect, then what do you actually do with this? Because I know, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts, hearing this is one thing and living it is another. So as I do with all my other episodes, Here's what rebuilding consistency actually looks like in practice, and it's way less dramatic than people expect. First, I want you to stop asking, how do I become consistent? Because there's so many ways that you can become consistent. And I want you to start asking, what keeps breaking my consistency? Because consistency doesn't disappear randomly. It breaks at predictable points, right? When it breaks when you miss once and you spiral, or the effort no longer feels connected to the meaning that you put on it, or the standard that you set for yourself is higher than the capacity at which you can currently operate, or you're trying to maintain a version of yourself that isn't sustainable long term. So the move isn't to raise your standards, it's to stabilize them. And one of the most helpful shifts that I made was that I stopped measuring consistency by output and started measuring it by the way that I return, the speed at which I return, right? How fast do I come back after I fall off? That's it. Not how long the streak is, not how intense the effort is, or how perfect the routine looks. Just how quickly do I return without making it a big deal. And that alone removes so much pressure, because now missing a day doesn't mean anything about who you are. It just means that you missed a day. And when consistency stops being tied to your self-worth, it becomes easier to maintain. Another thing that matters is, and actually more than people realize, is removal, not addition. I preach this all the time. Most people try to rebuild consistency, or discipline, or just become aligned with their goals by adding more habits, more goals, more structure. But if your life is already cluttered, adding more just creates friction, and it actually dilutes your goals. Sometimes consistency comes back when you remove an unnecessary commitment, or a habit that's distracting, or you remove an expectation that actually isn't yours. Clarity doesn't always come from doing more. Sometimes it comes from doing less, and doing it intentionally. And here's a big one. Here's a big thing that actually really helped me, especially, and this will help especially ambitious people. You don't need to feel confident to be consistent. Confidence is a byproduct, not a prerequisite. Waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel ready is how people stay stuck. But showing up while you're unsure is how self trust gets built. Every time that you show up without perfect emotion, you're telling your brain that I can be trusted. I can do this regardless of how I feel. And that compounds. You don't need to solve consistency for the rest of your life, okay? That part matters. You just need to solve it for the season that you're in right now. What consistency looks like right now, it may not be what it looks like 6 months from now, and that's fine. The goal isn't to lock yourself into a rigid identity, it's to build a flexible one that doesn't break when pressure arises. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I keep starting and stopping, and I can't figure out how to become consistent, right? That doesn't mean you're inconsistent. Don't label yourself like that. It just means that you're still learning how to stay, and that's a part of the process. Consistency isn't about never falling off, okay? It's about not disappearing when you do, and that's how it's built. So, thank you for listening to this episode of the Self Discovery Files. This was episode 15 about consistency. If you like this kind of content, then be sure to follow me on all my socials, my Instagram and TikTok at the Dylan Phipps. We'll be coming up with more content either next month or the month after. We're planning to do a lot more in-depth content, and just showing a little bit behind the scenes, so that's coming soon. If you haven't followed the podcast on whatever platform you are, follow to get updates whenever we post an episode, every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you next week for episode 16.